So first of all, I want to thank Pastor Deborah for the invitation. As many of you know, she is a humble rock star, but when she asks you to do something, rarely is it a bright or intelligent thing to say no, because you're going to end up doing it anyway. It's just a matter of how long you're going to go about saying no to get there. But all kidding aside, when you wanted to talk about joy and sorrow, I'm glad you found a Jew. That was. I take pride in that on so many levels. But kidding aside, how do we actually hold, right? How do we balance joy and sorrow, right? How do you balance a world where synagogues, okay, you have to be built with windows, right? I'm not sure if the law applies, if you will, to churches, but synagogues have to be built with windows because you have to be able to see the outside world. When you can pray all you want inside, you can aspire for a different world. You're not praying for that day for what is. You're praying for what will eventually be, but you have to be able to see what's outside. So when Pastor Deborah and I were talking about this idea of Blue Christmas and the idea of holding these things together, right, of holding kind of sorrow and joy, there were a couple of things in Jewish ritual that came to mind. So the first one is a Jewish wedding ceremony. So a Jewish wedding ceremony is, first of all, at least I can't speak to the Methodist Church, but to the Catholic Church, it's about an eighth of the time period, right? It is a Jewish wedding ceremony. You don't pass out while standing. It takes a really short amount of time, right? Basically, the longest period of time would be what I have to say under the chuppah to the couple. But what is tremendous about a Jewish wedding ceremony is at the very end, through all the joy, through all the amazingness that this couple, whomever they are, partner, spouse, whatever language we want to use, when they find each other, there's incredible great joy. The rabbis say that finding a spouse is as miraculous as God splitting the sea when he split the Sea of Reeds. And yet, at the very end of a Jewish wedding ceremony, it is customary for the groom or for one of the partners to break a glass under the chuppah. Now, if you find many Jews and you say, what is that breaking of the glass? What they know is that's the end of the service, right? Okay, but we're going to go back a little bit more and you're going to know more than all of my congregants, which is to say that the breaking of that glass is to remember the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and that the world is broken. And so that while you sit there at the moment of possibly the greatest joy in your life as you get married, the last thing you do before you go into that party and have an open bar is that you break that glass to make sure that you remember that there's brokenness, that not everything is shalem, not everything is as whole, right, as you are at that moment. The second one I'll give you is this, which also has to do with a wedding. So there's a great story. The rabbis in rabbinic literature, they come up with all types of questions in order to kind of give us answers, is the basic way to do it. And so they take the wedding procession and they say, well, what happens? This is the good old days, horse and buggy, horse and carriage. And they say, what happens under the circumstances where you get to a four-way stop, right? And on one corner, there's a funeral procession. Now, in Judaism, burying somebody in a kind of a quick or an expedited amount of time is a very important thing, right? I have a congregant who passed away yesterday morning. His funeral is an amazing, amazing man. But his funeral will be Monday morning, right? We don't wait, right? It's called kavod hamet. It is the idea that is how we honor the dead. So it's incredibly important and it's incredibly fast. So what do you do if you get to this four-way, this intersection, and while you're at the intersection, at the other corner is a wedding procession, right? What's supposed to take precedent at that moment? What are you supposed to do? Now, the rabbis, of course, are asking the question so they can give the answer, right? It's a Jeopardy-like situation of what goes on in rabbinic literature. But the rabbis quickly say that joy trumps sorrow. That, of course, in that idea, right, you honor the living, you honor the joy as opposed to the sorrow. It's not that the sorrow doesn't exist, right, but joy comes first. And I think that's a powerful thing to remember. It's not that we're not supposed to look outside. It's not that we're not supposed to be able to realize what's going on in the world, from food insecurity to poverty to homelessness and on and on and on and on and on. But that takes a second step to, if you don't have the level of joy inside yourself, you're not going to have the power to be able to go out in the world and fix it. So the third one is more modern day, but Jewish. So in Israel, there's a day called Yom HaZikaron. Yom HaZikaron is Israel's Memorial Day, if you will. So Jewish holidays start in the evening, just like the Sabbath for Judaism. So we start Friday night to Saturday night, no different than every other holiday. So Yom HaZikaron starts on whatever night of the week. It could be a Tuesday. It starts on Tuesday night to Wednesday night. And it is mournful. Right? Think about September 11th, of turning on the television and seeing for half a day all the names of those people who perished between the Pentagon in Pennsylvania, in New York. So imagine now you've got all the Israelis who have died in all of the wars that have been fought, all the terrorist attacks, what have you, an entire day of scrolling. Now the day ends, in our story, it ends on Tuesday night, it ends Wednesday night. And they're at Har Herzl, they're at the military cemetery. And as the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Israel will be there and they'll be laying wreaths, the minute dusk comes, the minute night comes, the holiday is over, and fireworks go off. And you say to yourself, what in the world could it be that fireworks would go off? Because the next day is Israeli Independence Day. Because they died so that we could have this. And let's never forget it. And that juxtaposition is tough. You're sitting there mournful that you would have lost family and friends and people that you know, and yet the next day you're lighting bonfires across the entire country, having delicious kosher meat, which I'm jealous of, all up and down the entire state of Israel, and yet the day before you were in tears because of a loved one standing over their grave. But there's that juxtaposition of how things work. So I'll end with this one. So this one is not rabbinic, but I take him as a Jew, even though he was a Catholic, or at least on TV, by the way. So if you don't know The West Wing, that's your loss, and we can try and be friends. I'm not sure how it'll work, but we'll figure it out. So the great prophet, President Josiah Bartlett, made a comment. It was in the first season of The West Wing, but he was quoting Psalms. That's really all that matters. He was quoting Psalms. And he said that joy comes in the morning. Because it said if it didn't, life wouldn't be worth living. Sorrow happens. But what wakes us up in the morning, what keeps us up at night to keep going, is joy. And that's an incredibly important thing to remember. So again, thank you again for allowing me to be here in your holy space. It was a real honor to be here.